So much. And welcome to our Sunday morning. My name is Reverend Alice Reed, and I am the spiritual leader here at Centers for Spiritual Living, Santa Cruz. We're located in Live Oak, and when we're not on a shelter in place and asked to stay home, we meet at 1818 Felt Street. But today you're here in my home, and I'm happy to have you here. Welcome. And we are talking about this beautiful theme of new beginnings, and quite a perfect theme to be talking about right now. We've got spring and we completed Easter. We had Palm Sunday. There was Passover. So truly there are a lot of things that are starting in April. And it's a little bit serendipitous that there's a lot of that's also unknown because of the unprecedented times that we find ourselves in. And if I had a nickel for every time I've heard somebody say unprecedented, well, I'd have a lot of nickels, wouldn't I? But really, we are having an experience like none other that we have experienced globally. And so it's time for us to really drop in and to see what this is all about and what kind of meaning we can make of this. And so this topic of new beginnings has been very conducive and relevant to what's going on in the world. Last week, I shared with you some wonderful information from a book called Transitions by a fella by the name of William Bridges. And he discussed transitions in a way that he sees them as having three stages. And we talked about them a little bit. The three stages are, every new beginning starts from an ending. And then we move into what he referred to as the neutral zone until we can truly inhabit the new beginning. And so last week we talked about endings. And this week we're going to talk about the neutral zone and our unwritten future. And so I want to explore what that neutral zone looks like, that in-between space, while we're in this great time of uncertainty and transition. And when I think about the way people and our culture and humanity relate to life, the word that comes to mind for me is Newtonian. Yes, Newtonian. It's a kind of a mechanical relationship with the physical world where we begin to and continue to respond to the world based on the evidence and the tangibility that we see around us. A Newtonian worldview is defined as the worldview underlying traditional science, also known as mechanistic or Newtonian. It is based in reductionism, determinism, materialism, and a reflection correspondence view of knowledge. And although it is simple and coherent and intuitive, it ignores or denies human agency, values, creativity, and evolution. And so when we think about this idea of living from a Newtonian worldview, the physical universe is the evidence that Newtonian science uses to explain life. The apple fell from the tree on Newton's head, and therefore gravity exists. However, gravity existed well long before Newton discovered it, quote unquote. And so much of our global culture relates more to the physical universe than anything else. It's the I'll believe it when I see it mentality. But by the time we actually see our physical reality, a lot has already taken place. You know that in our movement, in Centers for Spiritual Living, we really talk about this and teach this philosophy that everything's created twice, first in thought and then in form. So by the time we're relating to or responding to or reacting to form, we're way behind the curve of how the creative process works and how the life that we experience comes to be. So, as I was contemplating this topic this morning, I was thinking about how our past by itself does not dictate our future. it's only our investment in the past that predicates a likely future. And then if we're really looking at this idea of evolution and a broader vision of how we want to be in the world, to effectively design a new future for humanity, we have to be willing to let go of our past and to think differently. And while many of us have been shaped by our experience and our stories, we all have them. We've all had to work through those events in our life to get to some point that we are now and how we relate to the world. But while these stories may shape us, they don't have to define us. It's the thing that I want to talk about today, about how most of us have probably found ourselves at one point or another pre-corona in maybe a kind of autopilot, right? Where our days were very full and busy. There were a lot of external things pulling on us to perform and to do tasks and to take care of business. And our days would go by quickly and they would become weeks and then years, and we would find ourselves in the same sort of cycle, rat race, if you will. And rarely are we given a chance, like we are right now, to slow down and to really reevaluate our lives. I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. This virus has given many of us a very unique opportunity to push the pause button in our life and to slow down and to take stock, to see if there's anything we want to reset, perhaps resetting our values or thinking about how we behave in the world, or reevaluate the goals and the things that we thought were important. The fact is, on some level, I think humanity is called this pausing forth. We've created this pandemic, not because we sat down in a little room and said, let's create a pandemic and a lot of fear and a lot of upheaval, but because we needed something to really create the pause that we are experiencing right now. I'm sure you're like me. I've heard many people, had many conversations with people, in fact, where we've said something to the effect of something's got to give, something has to change. We can't keep going on like this. I think that the big idea, or the being tuned into this idea that something has to change, has, for at least for me, has come along with it no idea about how we could shift from the current way that we are inhabiting life in our Western civilization, in our world. There just didn't seem to be any way to break from the patterns and the deeply held relationships that we have with our physical reality. I still think we're a little fuzzy about what we want. I know that we all want a brighter world that really is working for everyone, but the question that comes up for me is, are we really ready to change? A wise person once said that change happens when the pain of remaining the same becomes greater than the pain of change. And I agree with this to a point. I might add that unintentional, unconscious change happens when the pain of remaining the same becomes greater than the pain of change. The most difficult part about stepping into newness is letting go of what we've already known. I think about that metaphor, you may have heard it before, about the trapeze artist who's trying to get from one side of the circus to the other side of the circus, and he's holding on to the bar for dear life, because if he lets go of that bar, he certainly will come to harm. But in order to get to the other side, he has to completely let go of everything that is keeping him from harm's way in order to let go and to reach out and to grab the bar on the other side that is swinging towards him. And he has to inhabit that space of the unknown in order to get to where he wants to get to. And likewise, in order for us to truly inhabit this beautiful world our hearts know is possible, we have to let go of the world that we're living in now. Centers for Spiritual Living has a beautiful global vision of a world that works for everyone. And I'm sure you'll all agree that the world that we're living in right now does not necessarily work for everyone, does it? And there's a great deal of divisiveness about what we think needs to happen in order for the world to work better, in order for it to work for more people. And while there's a lot of passion and ideas, there's very little agreement about the wide variety of those ideas. And the weight of that disparity, in my opinion, has become so great that it has brought our world to a grinding halt. And of course, the vehicle that created that halt, that stop, the thing that caused us all to pause was COVID-19. And despite its gruesomeness, despite the hardship that it has created and the fear and the pain and the loss, I also see it as some kind of strange elegance. It reminds me of a D.H. Lawrence poem, a couple of lines that I'll share with you this morning. What is knocking on the door in the night? Is it somebody that wants to do us harm? No, no. It is three strange angels. Admit them. Admit them. So this COVID-19 is a strange angel. It's come here to invite us and shepherd us into greater possibility. And the opportunity for us, and by us I mean humanity, is to actively engage in a consciousness shift like no other time in history for our civilization. I know it sounds big. It is. It's really big. There's a body of work by Lynn McTaggart. I'm sure you've heard of it. She's written a book called The Power of Eight, and she's done a lot of scientific research looking at how the power of our intention actually changes our reality, and she's documented it in some experiments. They did some experiments with seeds and plants, and they had a number of people who would have a deliberate and intentional thought process. They would be thinking and intending for something to happen, and they documented that indeed shift happened. And so she went from the laboratory working with materials and plant life to working with people, and she found that with a group of 8 people, they could all focus on an intention, and they could direct their intention, and healing and shift would happen. Family members would bring forth somebody who needed healing in their family, and the group would spend a week holding that intention, and then they documented some wonderful and amazing things that happened through that. And so when I think about that power of 8 and that power of intention, and with 7.7 billion people on the planet, we are exponentially working with this power of 8, with almost 8 billion people thinking about the same thing at the same time. And your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to cultivate your consciousness. I am reading a wonderful book in preparation for my class that's coming up on Tuesday, April 28th, called Evolutionaries by Carter Phipps. And Phipps writes that evolutionaries understand the impact that they have not only on their own life, but on the noosphere, the collective consciousness, if you will. And the noosphere is this great word that I believe Pierre Chardin brought forth, and it's a combination of words. He's coined the phrase bringing together the term noetic meaning knowledge, and sphere meaning area. So the noosphere is this collective knowledge, or as Phipps writes, the thinking layer that surrounds the planet, representing humanity's interior life. The thinking layer that surrounds the planet. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Of course it does. That's what we talk about. We talk about consciousness, and Phipps is trying to couch that in more scientific terms, but he's really looking at that interior experience that we have as human beings. And he goes on to write that evolution has gone well beyond the biological aspects, and he brings forth this idea of cultural evolution, which is the product of the noosphere, or our collective thinking. And while Phipps's ideas aren't necessarily new, and they're very familiar to us as Centers for Spiritual Living students and as students of this philosophy, he draws some conclusions that are quite compelling. Phipps talks about the importance of breaking what he calls the spell of solidity. The spell of solidity. In other words, if we want to be an evolutionary, we have to be comfortable with the fact that everything in our world is constantly in motion. And I don't know if you're like me, I can get pretty stuck on trying to create more security when I feel like everything's in motion. And as a matter of fact, that's been my experience over the last 30 some days during our shelter in place. Initially it was all about trying to create more solidity. It was about trying to figure out how we were going to continue to function as a community in this new virtual environment when we couldn't be with each other. And so our Western culture really values systems and routine only because those are the places where we feel safest. And so it's not uncommon, it's actually pretty natural for us to begin to look for patterns that will help us to create more predictability in our lives. Yet evolution, by its very nature, is about change. Letting go of what is and moving forward to what wants to be. I looked up the word evolve, and it is the process of evolution to a different adaptive state or condition. So rather than stability, our best approach to an evolving world is to be adaptive. Because let's face it, the world is evolving, whether we're conscious of it or not, whether we're actively working with it or not, evolution is happening. And it's our human nature, as I've already talked about, to resist change. Change is uncomfortable. Change isn't easy. It's too unpredictable. And this is what Phipps means when he writes about the necessity to break the spell of solidity in order for us to really truly inhabit this space of being an evolutionary. And I don't know about you, but this pandemic has provided the perfect storm in my life for breaking down any sense of solidity that I had BC, before Corona. There's very little that feels solid in my world right now, and I imagine many of you feel the same way. And it seems like the only grounding that I can find is my spiritual practices and prayer. You may notice that we picked up a Wednesday night broadcast where we're doing spiritual practices because that's the place where we're going to be able to find solid ground in the midst of all this transition. It's the place where we cultivate that interior reality that Phipps was talking about, because that's the place where the neutral zone is. That's the space between everything I've known up until now and everything I hope for. And when I really step into this place of trying to control it all, well, that's pretty Newtonian. That's the old way of seeing things. What I know about the Newtonian viewpoint is that it was based on some old science, and it doesn't really take into effect the power of the human consciousness to change the reality we're experiencing. And so when we step into our spiritual practices, this is the place where we begin to have and glean and tap into more power. And right now, folks, this is the time to not take action. Right, that's right. Not take action. Because any action or attempt to control the reality that we're experiencing right now is going to be tainted by our past. And we need to create the break from the solidity that we were entrenched in if we really want to step into true newness, if we really want the world to change. It's going to require that we pull back, that we begin to experiment with this thing called shelter in place, where we can come apart from one another, where we can let go of everything that we've known and begin to allow ourselves to tap into the intuitive side of life, that part of us that comes from our interior reality, the greater reality that taps into consciousness. If we really want to see a vision, this beautiful vision that we have of a world that works for all, and I say all instead of everybody because I want to see a world that works for people. I want to see a world that works for animals. I want to see a world that works for the planet. So if we really want to see a world that works for all, well, we can't keep doing what we've been doing and expect different results. In order to really tap into our unwritten future, we have to stop drawing from the past. Now, I'm not saying that we throw it out. We can honor it. We can learn from it. But the newness we seek must come from something beyond what we have known before. And my invitation to you is to dive deep into your spiritual practices: meditation, journaling, affirmative prayer, visioning, stillness. To dive deep into those practices in an effect, cultivating our conscious awareness so that we could really be available for what wants to come through us in this time of being apart, in this time of being in the reflective atmosphere of our own mind, so that we can begin to direct it. We can begin to be conscious of what it is we're creating through our thoughts. Because when we are unconscious of the evolutionary process, we evolve through pain and discomfort and problems. If we aren't conscious with evolution, it creates distress so that we can change. Kind of like a pandemic, right? The old school of evolution is survival of the fittest. What does not kill you makes you stronger. But Phipps is quick to note that when we actively engage in conscious evolution, we find that evolution can happen through cooperation and building a collective consciousness that is creative and positive and supportive, and I would add compassionate. Our thoughts are things. We teach that. We've been teaching that for 100 years. And we always are impacting the worldview by the thoughts that we choose. This is our true point of power. That our point of power isn't in all the things that everybody's talking about right now, more testing and focusing on the coronavirus. Our point of power is focusing on our thoughts around what's going on, and then choosing how we want to hold that. This is how we change the world for the better. This is how we tap into and author our unwritten future. By minding our mind, by paying attention to our thoughts, by listening to our heart, by leaning into those values that have been calling us forward and tapping us on the shoulder with a gentle little nudge. Now's the time for us to really reflect, to pay attention to the part of the noosphere that you are creating. You have the power to change the world through your intentions, through your values, and through the thoughts that you choose. So I want to invite you over this next coming week to allow yourself to, in this time of shelter in place, in this time where we're called to be apart, to really pay attention to, to your mind and your thinking, and to begin to allow yourself to just be in the space, the neutral zone, if you will, during this transition, so that you can find your power, which is in that interior reality that only you can tap into. So I want to thank you very much for joining me this morning as we talk about this idea of new beginnings and leaning into them, and what that means for us as Centers for Spiritual Living and individuals that follow this philosophy.